Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and with GTA's most recent Chop Shop DLC, Rockstar added 4 new catch-up modes to races with advanced low, medium and high and boosted modes, also renaming the original version to Classic. In this video, I'll first be explaining some fundamentals about how catch-up works, then I'll go over how each individual mode uses those fundamentals to give different effects on cars in races, and finally I'll let you know which of the new modes are completely broken, because of course they are. This video is brought to you by GTAcars.net, the #1 place for vehicle information for GTA 5 that I own and run. From lap times to tier lists and advanced metadata to informative articles, it's got everything that you need and more. Go straight there with the link in the description and pinned comment. Everything catch-up related works on the drag value of the car. As I covered all the way back in 2015 in a video I'll link in the description if you want more explanation, there are 3 main aspects to a car's handling that determine the actual top speed it achieves in-game. Its engine power value, maximum velocity value, and drag value. These are all numbers that are attributed within the handling data to each car, where the higher the engine power and maximum velocity values, the faster the car is, and the higher the drag value, the slower a car is. Catch-up generally works by increasing the drag value of a car, making you go slower, when you're in a higher position. Now a car with a really powerful engine but really high drag might have the same top speed as a car with low engine power but low drag. A pertinent example of this is the low engine power but low drag Tesseract and high engine power but high drag Tygon, where they end up with very similar top speeds despite having wildly different values across engine power and drag. The car with the higher engine power will be better on low speed acceleration as drag has more of an impact the faster you go, but that's beyond the scope of this video. However, the fact that catch-up affects a car's drag value is why the Tesseract was, and arguably still is, the best supercar to use for catch-up races, because its tiny drag value of 2, which is the lowest of any car in the entire game, barely changes in a catch-up race and leads to the Tesseract basically not getting slowed down by catch-up's effects. The higher a car's base drag value, the worse they'll be affected by catch-up. Catch-up also stops working as soon as any driver reaches the final checkpoint before the finish line in a race. Once that second to last checkpoint is hit, effects of catch-up across all modes are removed and the remaining few seconds of the race are run without catch-up at all. Race creators can also activate and deactivate both catch-up and slipstream effects on the fly on each individual checkpoint in a race. So now that we know the fundamentals, let's get started by revisiting the original catch-up mode, which is now called Classic. I made a video back in 2020 that showed a number of examples of what happened when catch-up was turned on, but we're able to go into a lot more detail now. Basically, Classic catch-up works by slowing down the first 3 drivers in a race. My findings from the previous video only found that the first place car was slowed down, but it's actually the top 3. The mistake in the original video came from the fact that we had people hit the final checkpoint when we were testing for 2nd and 3rd places, which I didn't realise at the time negated the catch-up effects entirely. With Classic catch-up, if you're in 1st place you get slowed down by a lot, while 2nd and 3rd places are also slowed down but not by as much. In any other position, from 4th all the way down to 30th, there's no slowdown effect at all. So we can see in these examples how Classic catch-up affects a relatively normal car in the Massacro with a pretty standard drag value of 10. When in any position from 4th to 30th, its top speed is its normal 122.75 mph. When in 3rd place, that drops to 116 mph, going to 112 mph when in 2nd, and finally dropping all the way to 105 mph when in the lead of the race. And the catch-up mechanic is doing all of this by increasing the drag value of the car to make it slower by utilising a drag multiplier. At this point I'd like to give a big thank you to Floorball for his help in getting some concrete values and formulas directly from the game that we'll see from this point on, and both Floorball and Logan for their help in debugging the various issues that we collectively found that we'll talk about later. The formula for the Classic version is as you can see on screen, but the basic thing to know is that the base drag value of the car is multiplied by the drag multiplier for the position that you're in, resulting in a new drag value and the top speeds shown. For first place in a classic catch-up race, this drag multiplier is 2, so the drag value of the car is being doubled when in first. But now onto the new modes. They all work in exactly the same way as I've just described with the classic version, in that they affect the drag value of the vehicle, but instead of only affecting the top 3, the new modes affect more people in the race depending on the type. Let's first of all look at the advanced low catch-up mode. The formula for this is as displayed on the screen now, but an important caveat is that it only affects the top 50% of drivers in a race. So in an 8-player race, only the top 4 will be getting slowed down. For a 30-player race, it'll be the top 15. All of the advanced modes lead to a gradual increase in the car's drag value as your position in the race improves, rather than the small increase initially for second and third spots in Classic with a big increase for first place. And the low advanced mode's highest level of speed reduction is actually less than that of the Classic mode, with a maximum drag multiplier of 1.5 rather than the 2 of Classic. So with advanced low, first place is significantly better off than with Classic, while second is slightly better off and third to 15th, for example, in a 30-player race, are worse off. In terms of how this actually looks in-game, you might remember from a few minutes ago that with Classic Catch-Up, the Massacro went 105 mph when in first place, where its normal top speed is around 17 mph faster at 122.75. Well, with Advanced Low, its top speed in first place is closer to its unaffected speed at 112 mph. In essence, especially given the tiny differences between each position in the top half, Advanced Low will have a very limited impact and is closer to running a race without catch-up at all. The Advanced Medium mode utilises the formula displayed here, but this time affects the top 80% of drivers in a race. This time the drag increase for top spot is slightly higher than that of Classic with a multiplier of 2.25, and everyone in the race except the bottom 20% of drivers are worse off than they would be with the Classic mode. For context, in a 30-player advanced medium race, the top 7 drivers will all be experiencing the same or more speed reduction as what first place would in a Classic catch-up race. Going back to the Massacro, its top speed in first place of an advanced medium race drops to 101 mph, 4 mph slower than what it was when in the lead of a Classic catch-up race. However, keep in mind that more people are affected in an advanced medium race, and with the same difference in drag increases from one position to the next, each position will find it more difficult to catch up to the front in comparison to Classic, since every time you improve, you'll then be going a little bit slower. In the Advanced High mode, it's the same story in terms of the graduated drop-off of drag values for each position, but for this one, it affects everyone in the race except the person in last place. Only last place will be going a speed equivalent to having no catch-up effects at all, while the drag multiplier for first place is a whopping 3, so 3 times the drag acting on the car as what it would normally experience. Again, to bring in some context, the top 16 drivers in a 30-player Advanced High race will be experiencing the same or more speed reduction as what only first place would in a Classic catch-up race. But again, it's all relative. While the top speed of the Massacro in first place of an Advanced High catch-up race drops further again to just under 92 mph, which is 13 mph slower than when in the lead of a Classic catch-up race and a huge 31 mph slower than its normal top speed of 122 mph, it must be remembered that everyone else is also getting slowed down by quite a lot as well. We can extrapolate what the top speeds would approximately be for each position to give us this table showing the top speed of the Massacro in each position for a 10-player race. As you can see, only last place is able to go full speed, and importantly, the difference in speed for the advanced modes is pretty linear from one position to the next. For a 10-player race, there's around a 3 mph difference in top speed for each position. For a 30-player race, the differences in speed get even smaller between each position at only around 1 mph. In practice, this linear drop-off of performance that the advanced modes provide gives a more nuanced racing experience, and ultimately one where it's more likely for a good driver to still be consistently at the front than with the Classic mode. Unlike in Classic, where you can utilise the full potential of a car as long as you're in 4th place or lower, with the advanced modes, someone in the mid-pack still has to overcome a relatively significant amount of speed reduction in order to catch up to the leaders, making their job much harder. And the closer they get to the front, the more of a speed reduction they have to overcome. The differences between each position are actually a lot smaller than with the Classic mode unless you've got a small number of racers, so it will naturally be a lot more difficult for people further back to work their way to the front. For example, even in the advanced high mode, you'll only be going 1 mile per hour quicker than the person in front of you in a 30-player race. You might be down in 20th and going 20 miles per hour faster than the guy in first, but each time you gain a place, you lose an extra mile per hour to your own top speed. It doesn't make an awful lot of sense to also be slowing down the slower, perhaps less experienced drivers as well as those at the front in this situation. Because 6th place is being slowed down, it makes it harder to catch up to 5th. Because 5th place is being slowed down, it makes it harder to catch up to 4th, and so on. While all of this negates some of the fun that can be had with classic catch-up races where you can get, say, 10 to 15 people all racing side by side towards the line as everyone below the top 3 are all able to go at full speed and people cycle around with their time at the front to allow the whole pack to close up, the advanced modes are a much more fleshed out experience that give a more fair way to balance performance depending on the level used. Although most of the time, you probably might as well just race with catch-up turned off entirely. All of the new modes are more a case of slowing down the rate at which the whole pack stretches out from first to last, rather than actually helping those at the back to, catch up. And that's not to mention that even classic catch-up only really works on tracks where there's longer straights. If it's a tighter track with more acceleration zones, or a bumpy city track where people can curb boost a lot, or if you're just racing cars that don't have very high drag values like the Tesseract, the effects of catch-up are going to be minimal anyway. And that's because, just like with the classic version, cars with low drag won't be affected as much, meaning things like the Tesseract will continue to barely be slowed down, while the opposite is true for cars with high drag values. As an example, when the Tesseract with its aforementioned drag value of 2 is in first place on the most harsh mode of Advanced High with its 3 times multiplier, its drag value only increases to 6, which is still lower than most cars in the game. In that situation, its top speed drops from 125.75 miles per hour normally to 120.25, a drop of just under 5%. However, the Amorgon, with one of the highest drag values in the game of nearly 27, sees its drag value increase to 81 in that same situation, which is crazy high, and its top speed drops from an already slow 106.75 miles per hour normally to just 75.25 miles per hour under the same circumstances, a nearly 30% drop in speed compared to the Tesseract's 5%. The fact that the catch-up effects will be different for different cars is definitely a problem with all the variations, classic and boosted included, and you can see from the examples on screen how much of a difference that makes in game, where the Tesseract barely looks any different while the Amorgon is crawling along. With all that being said, it is nice to see some thought being put into the mechanic, and the advanced modes have a good idea on the face of it. It's just that in practice it's rarely going to be of much use. I think a better system would have been something that combines parts of the old classic mode and new advanced modes. What would probably work better is just to have 2 modes overall, low and high. Both would have the entire bottom half of the field being completely unaffected and able to drive at normal speed, just like how it works now for Advanced Low, then ramp up the drag multipliers from there depending on the level chosen. As you can see from the examples on screen, my proposed low mode would have the same level of slowdown for first place as Classic does now, with a more graduated drop-off, while my proposed high mode would have the same level of slowdown for first place as Advanced High does now, but again with a non-linear difference between positions and still only affecting the top half. As you can see, they're kind of a hybrid between what we have now, where the top spots are most affected and the difference in the amount the car is slowed down between each position actually increases as you get closer to the front. This, alongside it only affecting half the field at all times rather than only the top 3 of Classic or the whole field of Advanced High, I think would do a better job at what it's intended to do and bring the field closer together to provide exciting races while also leaving room for skill to overcome the slowdown to a certain extent. You can see how, when we extend the numbers out to 30 players, my proposed catch-up multipliers make a lot more sense for bigger fields, and we see the biggest slowdowns in the top positions, with the majority of drivers not being impacted or being slowed down only slightly. It would also be good to figure out a way to have this affect something independent of the car's drag value or anything related to the individual cars themselves, to avoid some cars being more badly affected and others barely being affected at all. There's no need for 5 different modes, and alongside Advanced Medium and Low, I'd also just get rid of Boosted too, since, as we'll talk about in a few seconds, that isn't really useful to help people catch up either. A version that has the equivalent slowdown in first place as Classic catch-up, and then a more extreme version in line with the current Advanced High mode, with a more aggressive increase of drag the closer you get to the front and only ever affecting the top half of the field, is probably all that's needed. So what about the boosted mode, because it definitely doesn't work in a similar way to the Classic catch-up we're all used to. Well, it still affects the car's drag value by using a multiplier, but instead of increasing it for everyone above last place, thereby making everyone slower, it decreases it for everyone below first place. This means that first place is the only one in a boosted catch-up race that has a car going the same speed as it normally would without catch-up being on at all. Everyone else has reduced levels of drag and therefore faster cars, with last place going the fastest of all. But there are some interesting considerations with this which we'll come on to soon. It's governed by the formula shown here, with one important difference in comparison to the advanced modes being that the values on the very end can change. With the advanced modes, the drag reduction for first place is always the same, so whether there's 30 players or 5 players, first place will always be getting slowed down the same amount, and it's only the speed reduction for those in between first and last that changes based on the number of players in the race. For boosted, the speed increase for last place is actually higher the more people that are in a race. There's no hard limit, and then everything scales in between. In a 5-player race, last place will have a drag multiplier of 0.6, but for a 30-player race, last place's drag multiplier is 0.52. Not a huge difference, but also not inconsequential. Going back to the Massacro, its top speed in last place of a 30-player race goes to a whopping 143 miles per hour, increasing by over 20 miles per hour from its normal top speed. That's because the drag multiplier of 0.52 at that point reduces the Massacro's drag value to 5.2, which becomes lower than most cars in the game. But what about cars with high levels of drag? Surely there'd be a bigger speed improvement for those. Well, as we know, the Morgon that we saw earlier has one of the highest levels of drag in the entire game and was so badly affected by the other modes, so it had a lot to gain by chopping that drag value in half. But in the best case scenario, being in last place of a 30-ish player boosted catch-up race, the Morgon tops out still 12 miles per hour slower than the fastest non-HSW sports car of the Pariah, with a top speed of just 124 miles per hour. I also tested the BR8, which has high drag but also a high engine power, and that saw a similar improvement to the Massacro. Honestly, I was expecting to see a bigger difference for these higher drag cars, especially given what we saw from the other modes where the more drag a car had normally, the worse it was affected. But I saw a pretty consistent 16 to 70% speed improvement over their unaffected top speeds across all cars I tested. I think there's probably some other limiting factors to getting a higher top speed at that point, and simply reducing the drag further and further can only do so much. Since I didn't see anywhere near the same differences in speed across different cars with the speed increase from boosted catch-up in comparison to the speed decrease from the other catch-up modes, I wanted to do one last test with the Tesseract. Going into it, I expected it to completely switch from earlier and be the worst car for a boosted catch-up race, barely seeing an increase in its top speed for the same reasons that it barely saw a decrease in the other modes. And I was right. The Tesseract actually had the same top speed in last place of a boosted catch-up race as it does normally. Reducing that drag value from 2 to 1 basically had no impact on the Tesseract's performance. I think at the very extreme ends of the scale, other aspects take over to define the speed of vehicles, and there's probably some sweet spot in the middle that will maximize the speed increase from the boosted mode, which the Massacro is probably close to doing, to be honest. But ultimately the major problem for this mode is the same as what I explained earlier with Advanced, in that the differences between each car and each position are so small that it doesn't really make much of a difference in practice. The quicker drivers will still be at the front, and it's still going to be harder for those further back to catch up as their increase in speed reduces for each position they gain. This is especially true when you consider that the biggest level of drag reduction a player in last place in a boosted catch-up race can have is about 50%, compared to the 200% drag increase of the Advanced High mode. There's just not enough of a difference made when you're trying to squish in values for different positions from top to bottom within a 50% range. In a 30 player race, you're actually going less than 1 mile per hour faster than the person in front of you in a best case scenario, which is even worse than the difference in Advanced High mode. Being 2/3 of a mile per hour quicker than the person directly in front of you basically makes no difference at all in a racing situation. In addition to all of that, with the boosted version, you're basically giving the slower, less experienced drivers an even harder job by making their cars quicker. If someone is running in last place and can't drive well enough to catch up under normal circumstances, they're not suddenly going to be able to do that with a higher straight line speed. If anything, it makes the problem worse, as the car becomes even harder to drive properly with longer braking distances and things like that. And again, it doesn't really help with any of the cornering aspects of racing, which is where most of the time is gained anyway. The only thing that boosted really allows is for people to scum world records by being in a faster car than they should if they've got other people to fill in the spots and allow them to be in last place for a whole lap. But it wouldn't be a GTA fact-finding video without revealing that something doesn't work as intended, and for this video it's the fact that 3 of the 4 new catch-up modes that Rockstar added are actually completely broken and simply don't work in-game. All of the advanced catch-up modes that I spoke about earlier don't work in the way that I described. That's how they're intended to work. In practice, they're all bugged and in a way which renders them absolutely useless. Here's an example showing how the boosted mode works. Displayed on screen is the drag multiplier for the car. When in the lead of a boosted race, this value is 1, meaning the drag value of the car is the same as it normally would be without catch-up. As I lose positions and go further towards the back of the field, that drag multiplier decreases, which decreases the car's drag value and increases its top speed. As I gain positions again, it goes back the other way. Again, this is an example of the boosted mode, which is the only one of the new modes that works as it should. But now let's look at what happens in one of the advanced modes, in this case Advanced High. As you can see, when we start the race in first place, we get the correct drag multiplier of 3 applied as expected. But this time, as I lose positions, that drag multiplier doesn't change. I'm stuck with that really high drag until I get outside of the range the catch-up is affecting the car, which in the case of Advanced High is last place. The multiplier will update one more time after dropping out of that range, and then get stuck again. This means that in an Advanced High catch-up race, all you have to do is drop to last place straight away, and then you'll only ever be experiencing the drag of being in second from last for the remainder of the race. You drop to last, you clear your starting multiplier, it updates one more time as you improve your position to second from last, and then it sticks there forevermore, unless you drop back to last place again. Whereas for those who are unlucky enough to start at the front, they'll be constantly experiencing the high drag multiplier they started with throughout the entire race, unless they also end up in last place at some point. What will likely end up happening is that everyone ends up in last place at some point during the race, then everyone is experiencing the same amount of slowdown as what you would get for being in second to last place, and there's effectively no catch-up effects going on at all because everyone's being slowed down by the same tiny amount. And in an ironic twist, when looking at the drag multiplier values live in an advanced low race, it's clear to see that they actually update correctly, but only outside of the range that they're actually working in. When you're in the bottom half of the field, you can see the drag multiplier updating as it should on every position change. It only locks up and stops updating when outside of that bottom half. But because everyone in the bottom half experiences a hard-coded multiplier of 1 in order to stop catch-up affecting them in an advanced low race, it updating correctly down there has absolutely no impact. It's basically back to front. The multiplier only updates correctly in the area where it's not even being used. And this basically renders all 3 advanced catch-up modes useless. It's actually impossible to know how the modes would affect a race because it's impossible to have a race with them working as they should. The testing you've seen in this video has shown the top speeds of the cars how they should be in first place of each of the modes, where I've made sure to start in first place and maintain the correct drag value for the whole testing run. And I've actually had to redo these tests multiple times because inconsistencies in the results on the first round of my testing is what led us to find this problem in the first place, which further shows the importance of the proper car testing I do on this channel. But as soon as you get into a race where positions keep changing, everything breaks down and the modes aren't doing what they're supposed to do. I'd imagine this will get fixed, but it likely won't be until the next downloadable update in the summer, if even then. I will leave a pinned comment on this video with the status of this bug so you can know if it's still broken or if it's been fixed, so check there if you're watching this later down the line. Ultimately, I still have the same opinion as I did in my very first video about GTA racing on this channel back in 2013. Catch-up in general is a bad mechanic, and especially so if it's turned on by default. It can be a fun variation for racers, but it shouldn't be the norm. These new modes are a good attempt at creating something more nuanced and fair, but in my opinion missed the mark slightly by going too far in the other direction. And when the default setting in races is still classic, the amount of people who use these modes is going to be minimal. Most of the GTA population just leave the settings on their default values. From a purist perspective, that default value should have been without catch-up at all, but at least they're trying and testing out new things, presumably for GTA 6. My preference would be having catch-up off by default, and then the 2 modes that I proposed earlier so as not to overcomplicate things, as long as they work as they should. Maybe we can get some more nuanced slipstream modes next. It needs to be about 5% of its current effectiveness for those of us who like to race properly to even consider turning it on for proper races. But we'll just have to wait and see what the future holds. I really hope that this video has been enjoyable and informative. I think this has to go alongside the fact-finding video explaining how downforce works and how that's also broken in some cases, as the one which has taken me the longest to make from start to finish, from writing out a draft script, doing some in-game testing, realizing something wasn't quite right, troubleshooting and figuring out the broken modes, rewriting the script multiple times as we discovered more and more, collecting footage to showcase the issues and do more testing to get some proper values, to then actually making and editing the final product that you're seeing today. It's been one hell of an effort. If you think that's worth something, by all means leave a comment and a like on the video, and feel free to subscribe for more GTA car testing if you haven't already. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh my god, he really is lagging. Oh, he's lagging so hard. He's just taking everybody out. And he's still in the lead. No! Come on! Oh. Well, it was a disappointing end with the lagging and the takeout there. But we got some good action for the rest of the race.